Okay, this is supposed to be on. Is it on? Hello, hello. Mic check, one, two, three. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. Can you all hear me? All right, okay, that does sound better. All right. Morning, everyone. Name is Keeman. I am the speaker for this morning. Before I go any further, though, if you're on the stream, we really want to apologize due to technical difficulties. You probably missed out on worship, which was amazing. You can ask other people who were here about, the pyrotechnics and the laser show and everything else. But in all seriousness, really sorry that the technical difficulties prevented you from worshiping along with us. I loved it though, like it was on fire, and hopefully, you're able to tune in, enjoy the rest of the message and service, and be here with us online, if you will. So great to see everyone here. I see some people wearing jackets like me on a rainy day in Singapore. It's always nice to put on that jacket. It's like, oh yeah, it's all comfy. Those of you who come from colder climates, you're like, this is still not cold, but still t-shirt and shorts weather. That's fine. That's fine. Rob mentioned this earlier, but just a quick reminder: we will be having our church finance meeting after service. It'll start about 30 minutes after we wrap up service. It's a great opportunity to come and find out more about the church financial picture. You may have been kind of following over the last couple weeks, months, years, but the last few years, through the pandemic, we've really kind of taken time to really get our bookkeeping in order. It was one of those things that it was always kind of like when you're a young startup, right? Like it's always like the last priority. Like we'll worry about, caring for the people and building the church and everything else, and kind of the bookkeeping kind of fell behind. But finally, thanks to God and thanks to people like Ish and Mike and Hamish and others, we were finally able to get everything brought current. So we can present our audited financial statements for the last few years to the church, to anyone who's interested. Mike did wonder who on earth would be interested in looking at audited financial statements, but I'm sure people out there, some of you would love to look at a nice, good, clean cash flow statement. So if that's you, please come to the meeting. If you have questions about how we run the church, where does all the tithing and offering go, please come to the meeting. I know not everyone can make the meeting though, so I will hit a couple of just highlights real quick. And it's all good news, actually. It's all good news. The short version is that our vision is larger than our tithe, right? I'll say that again. Our vision is larger than our tithe. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, does that mean that we actually don't have enough to spend to meet the vision? And the answer is yes, but I think that's good news, right? I think it's good news because it means that, we have this belief, this conviction that God is leading us to do more than we currently can, than we currently seem able to. And I think that's good news for us. I think it's also good news because it then requires us as a church, as a family, to say, okay, well, then if this is the vision, if, reaching out to the community, serving the youth around us, serving migrant workers, growing the church, being here for each other, if this is what we're here for, then how do we lean in? How do we be a part of making that more and more of a reality? So that's the good news. The other piece of good news is that actually, if you ask the church leadership team, so all those of us who are part of the core leadership team, the pastors, Mike, me, Argus, Reina, we're actually not worried about it. And the reason we're not worried about this is because it's not really our job as a church, really, to come up with money. It's not our job to provide for the vision that God has. If you think about what the Bible says, right, everything comes from God. God is the provider. Our job is just to be faithful, right? It's like, okay, if this is the vision, then let's pursue the vision, right? Let's trust on God to provide for it. And so that's what we're doing. So, some people say, well, that sounds like bad news and good news, but I think it's all good news, actually. I think it's all good news. But if you want to find out more, please come to the church finance meeting, because this is actually not the topic of today's sermon. So come to the finance meeting. We can talk more. You can ask questions. Mike will give a short little presentation on the church financial picture. Hamish is down with COVID, but he said he'll Zoom in anyway, so he can be part of the meeting as well. So that's church finance meeting. And then let's talk about the message for today. So it is related, right? So today's message is about giving and generosity. When we as a church core leadership team, oh, by the way, I should have mentioned, I'm also on the church core leadership team, like the church board. And that's why I'm about to mention what I'm about to mention. We sat down a couple months ago to kind of start talking through planning for like the next couple quarters, just kind of where the church is. And as we talked about, kind of this church finance meeting that we're going to have, being able to be transparent and open with the church about our finances, invite people to ask questions. And we realized one thing. The church is constantly changing, right? Some of you are new. Some of you have started coming to Inspire in the last few weeks or months. Some of you have been here for years. But not everyone may have the same understanding of giving and generosity and how this ties into following Jesus. And so, some of you, maybe you're new to the faith, right? You made a decision to follow Jesus fairly recently, and so you're just learning, right? You're like, okay, I want to come to church, I want to learn more. What does it mean for me to follow Jesus? Maybe some of you came from churches where the tithing and the giving was very prescribed, like it's 10%, and you always give 10%. And then, the really nerdy ones will argue, like, is that before tax or after tax? And how else do you define that 10%? Maybe others of you are kind of burned out or disillusioned by churches where you felt like giving was kind of compelled or it was kind of coerced, right? You're kind of put off by these these flashy, charismatic preachers with lots of bling, right? Who are constantly telling people to give more so they get blessed more, right? There's a line from this great U2 song where Bono says, "The God I believe in isn't short on cash, mister." And that's the U2 reference for today's sermon. So regardless of, I heard Royce laughing in the back, but regardless of where you are, we thought it'd be good where you come from, we thought it'd be good for us to talk a little bit about what giving and generosity means for those of us who want to follow Jesus. What we believe, what we at Inspire believe, God teaches about it through the Bible and through our experience. And then somehow I was the one who was picked, which was kind of serendipitous. So, Hamish happened to get COVID, which I guess, if you got to get it, the week that you're not preaching is probably a good week to get it. And so I'm going to be talking about that today. But I'm not going to talk just about giving in terms of money and material wealth and possessions, because I think that's just one fraction of it, right? That's one part of it. But I think when Jesus talks about giving and generosity, it's not just about the money. It's about it's about all of our life, right? So what I really want to talk about is generosity as a principle in life. And then I will spend time talking about it in the context of money and material wealth, because let's face it, I think that's something that a lot of us kind of struggle with. I know I have, I still do to some extent. But let's start by looking at the big picture of generosity. So put your wallets away, put your purses away. We'll get to that element and that aspect of generosity in a little bit. But let's zoom out a little bit first. Let's talk about generosity from the big picture. And so with that, can I have the first scripture for today on screen? Anytime now? I need it because I have my notes open but not my Bible, so I can't actually read it. There we go. Okay, so I want to start us off in Psalm 50. I bring no charges, this is God speaking, right, through the psalmist. I bring no charges against you concerning your sacrifices or concerning your burnt offerings, which are ever before me. I have no need of a bull from your stall or goats from your pens, for every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains, and the insects in the fields are mine. If I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you, for the world is mine, and all that is in it. And that is God speaking, right? And this, I think, is the starting point of Christian generosity, remembering that God doesn't actually need our giving. God doesn't need our giving, right? God kind of owns everything, right? In the Christian tradition that I grew up in, we had a contemporary service where we had the drums and the guitars and everything else. But every once in a while we would troop down to the big sanctuary, the pipe organ and the traditional service and the hymns. And there is this great hymn that I still remember called I think it's called "We Give Thee But Thine Own," right? And it's really a hymn that really kind of captures this, right? There's this beautiful line in it which says that all that we have is thine alone, a trust, O Lord, from thee, right? Which, in modern day English just means that everything we have comes from God in the first place. We're just giving it back to God, right? So first off, we need to remember God, everything comes from God. Everything is God's. God doesn't ask us to give. He's not teaching us to give because God needs something from us, right? That's not the way that it works. And so from there, then I think we can also draw the conclusion that giving isn't about an absolute amount, right? It isn't about giving a tenth of your time or a tenth of your money or Jesus actually criticized some of the religious leaders of his day because they would even be so prescriptive as to give a tenth of their spices, of their dill and their cumin and their oregano and their whatever else they had, right? But they were like that prescriptive, like, oh, it's going to be a tenth of my everything. But that's actually not true, and it's actually not about the absolute amount at all. I think you can see this as well in like verses or stories like in Luke, I think it is, right? Luke 21, where Jesus sees a widow putting 2 coins into the temple offering, right? And he says like, look, she's given, her sacrifice is pleasing and acceptable. She's given all she has, right? It's just 2 coins. It's not like 20 cents, effectively, but she gave what she had, right? And it was the spirit with which she gave. Or like you think about the story of the feeding of I can't remember, it was 5,000 or 7,000, right? There's a little boy, and this is in the Gospel of John, I think. There's a little boy who has 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, right? That's what his mom gave him for lunch that day. And, I think school was not really a thing way back then. And so he was playing hooky from school, I don't know. But he went to hear Jesus preach, right? And then there was no food. And so this little boy gave all he had. He's like, well, I've got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. What are we going to do with this? And then Jesus uses that in a miraculous way to provide for thousands of people. It's not about the absolute amount. It didn't need to be 5,000 loaves of bread and 2,000 fish, right? It's whatever we have, right? It's the spirit of the giving rather than the absolute amount. So then you might ask, okay, so God doesn't need my money, God doesn't need my time, God doesn't need anything from me, so why bother, right? Why generosity? And I think really, it's really about us, actually. It's really for our benefit, right? Giving, I think, actually benefits the giver more than the receiver, more than the recipient. And I kind of liken it to I would say giving or generosity is about freedom, right? I think it sets us free in many, many ways. I've also heard it likened to, and I like this one, I think it's like heart surgery, right? I think there are many things in life that kind of block our spiritual hearts, right? That prevent spiritual life from flowing through all of us, the rest of our lives, the rest of our being. And I think giving and generosity is one way that God does surgery on our hearts. John, if you're listening to this was not inspired by you, but very apropos, where God kind of works on our hearts and unblocks the things that are blocking us, that are preventing us from living a fuller spiritual life. This is the work that generosity and giving does in us. I think it frees us, it makes us realize that, or actualize that we are not the center of the universe, that this life is not about us, right? It's about the people around us, it's about things, communities bigger than us. I think when you do it right, when you do it with the right spirit, right? As you grow in your faith, I think it brings you more and more joy, right? Where the more you give, I think you actually get more and more joy out of it. You're happy that you can give more, that you can bless and help others. And I think it also grows our faith, right? Because I'll get into this a little bit later, and it's kind of personal to me given where I am right now, but I think it also kind of helps you step out in faith and say, okay, look, I'm not going to trust what I have, right, to provide for me and for mine, for my family. I'm going to trust in God to do the providing. I'm just going to walk my walk, follow my God in faith, and trust Him to do it. So let's look at a couple of scriptures, because I think the Bible actually, by the way, do you know the Bible talks about money more than it talks about heaven and hell? I actually, okay, I didn't actually count it myself. That would be an overstatement, but I Googled it and relied on trustworthy sources who have done the work. And the Bible talks about money or material wealth more than it talks about heaven and hell. So think about that for a little bit, right? Let's throw up the next scripture, Matthew 6:19 to 24. So again, this is Jesus talking, right, to his followers, his disciples, people around him at the time. And he said, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal," or in modern day context, inflation, I guess. "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." But store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And then this is the clincher. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. You cannot serve both God and money. Let's pull up the next scripture, Luke 12. Again, Jesus, different disciples, slightly different account, same core message though, right? Jesus speaking again. Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. There was a rich man who had ground that yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What am I going to do? I have no place to store my crops." So he said, "I know what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and I will build bigger ones, and then I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." And I found this one really interesting, the not rich toward God part, because if you recall Psalm 50, God owns the cattle of 1,000 hills, right? Does he really need this rich man to give him something out of his surplus? Not really, right? So what does rich toward God really mean in this context? And then, in case you need any further convincing on this point, then there's 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. Basically, this is a letter written to Timothy by Paul. And he says, "The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." This is basically like warnings, right? This is like Paul as an older man, much more mature in his faith, kind of giving Timothy some pointers. And he says, watch out. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people who are eager for money or greedy have wandered from the faith, right? And have pierced themselves with many griefs. It means they've inflicted grief and hardship upon themselves because they have pursued after and sought after money rather than instead of God. So I think these, and by the way, these are just 3 extracts from the Bible that talk about how we should view money, right? And honestly, it's not just money itself, because there's nothing wrong with money. It's just a medium of exchange. It's just something that we have created because it's easier carrying money around, or your phone if you're a PayNow account, than carrying around gold bars, right? Or like 20 tons of wheat or whatever else. Money itself is just a medium of exchange, right? And the Bible actually has nothing against money. What the Bible and what God warned us about is loving money, pursuing money, or being greedy, right? That, I think, is the real issue. And again, we're still zoomed out, right? So don't think that this, even though the passages in the Bible that I've just talked about are about material possessions and wealth, remember, we're still kind of zoomed out, right? This is not just about what's in your wallet. This is also about your time, your emotional investment, right? What you care about, right? So remember that in mind, or keep that in mind. So I think what we can conclude then is that we are warned not to be greedy. We are warned not to think that we can serve both God and money at the same time. I think it's also pretty clear then that when he talks about giving, right, it's not about the absolute amount. I think what God really cares about is the spirit with which it's given, right? Again, the story of the widow, right, giving the 20 cents, the story of the young boy, right, giving up his lunch, right? It's more of the spirit and the attitude with which we give rather than the actual amount. And if you need any further convincing, there's also the story of Cain and Abel, right, in the book of Genesis, right, at the dawn of creation, or shortly after the dawn of creation, if you will, right? And I'm sure some of you are familiar with this story, but essentially there were two brothers, Cain and Abel. One reared animals, and one was a farmer, right? Cain was the one who was the farmer. He brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but not on Cain's. I think it's the New Living Translation, is actually the fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock is actually translated as the best, right? The best of what he had, the best of his flock. And so I think from Genesis all the way through, you'll see over and over again, right? The message is that it's not about the amount, right? Again, right? Like God owns all the animals and all the, agricultural produce of the world, right? Cattle of 1,000 hills, rice of 1,000,000 fields, all of it is God's. He doesn't need any of this, right? It's not about the amount. It's about the heart and the spirit with which the giving is done. Are we just giving God? Are we just giving some of what we have? Or are we giving the best of what we have? So I said earlier that I think giving is really about us, right? It's not, God doesn't need it. That's just, I know I keep saying it, but I just want to make it clear, everyone. God doesn't need what we have to give, right? Giving, I think, really benefits not even the recipient, but really benefits the giver, right? And I found this passage in 2 Corinthians 9, right? Let's pull it up. And this is, again, from the Message, which I think is an awesome version of the Bible, really helps me to think through what the words actually mean. So this is what it says in 2 Corinthians. Remember, a stingy planter gets a stingy crop. A lavish planter gets a lavish crop. Kind of makes sense, right? You plant one seed, you at best get one plant. You plant 100 seeds, you probably get 100 plants, right? Or somewhere around there. I want each of you to take plenty of time to think it over and make up your own mind what you will give. That will protect you against sob stories and arm twisting. God loves it when the giver delights in the giving. So I think for a lot of us, the one potential obstacle to giving is but then I won't have enough, right? Or I would love to help, but, right? This is set aside for something else. Or I need my time to do this other thing instead. And I think there is a time and place for that. Just so we're clear, I don't subscribe to the camp where we should sell everything we have and give it all away like today, right, or tomorrow, whatever. I don't actually think, I think that's actually a bit of a misinterpretation or misapplication of some of those verses and stories in the Bible, right? Like where in the early church, people sold all they had and gave it to the poor. I think that's a bit of a misapplication of those scriptures. But I think one thing is true, and which underlines the giving, true Christian giving, is that it should make you happy. Your giving should bring you joy. If you give and you're like, I gotta give because Keeman's preaching on giving, and so I gotta put something in the envelope, or I gotta scan that QR code. If you're giving because my mom and dad tell me I have to give, so fine, here's $5 from my allowance. No offense, but I don't quite think you're there yet. I don't think this truth has really kind of connected with you in your heart. Giving should bring us joy. Giving should bring us joy. If it doesn't, then I think we probably should just examine ourselves. Like, why am I not feeling joy at being able to give, being able to bless others, being able to respond to God's movement in my life, right? And I think then that's inner conversation between you and God that you should have. The other thing I will say is that when we talk about giving bringing joy, I want to make it also clear that this is not about a one-off emotion or an impulse, right? When I was preparing to give the message this morning, I talked to a friend of mine who's the treasurer at another church in Singapore. And he shared this great insight, right, that I really kind of stuck with me. He said that, he's been the treasurer at his church for many years now. He's kind of talked about giving and talked to other people about giving and supporting the church and all that for a long time. And he said that he always gets concerned when there's a spike in giving after someone preaches a message or a sermon on generosity and on giving, right? So I'll say it again. He's always concerned when the giving spikes after there's a message on giving. And I asked him why, and he said, well, when the giving spikes after someone preaches a sermon and it comes back down again, returns to normal, he said, I always wonder, why are they giving, right? Do they feel guilted into giving? Like someone said, oh, you should give, and oh yeah, I haven't given in a while, so let me give, right? Relieve the burden of guilt, and then let's all move on with our lives. Or is it an impulse, right? Is it a one-off thing? It's great sermon, I really feel led by God to give, and they give, and then after that impulse fades, the giving fades as well, right? I sort of grew up in the church. I started going to church, when I was probably about 13, 14. And it's really interesting because if you go to church as a teenager, you probably go to some sort of Christian summer camp, retreat, youth, this, that, the other. And then there's always seems to be this surge of enthusiasm and energy and everything else right after the big event, right? Whatever that is. And then it kind of fades over time sometimes for some people. And I kind of wonder whether it's kind of like that with giving sometimes. Someone preaches the sermon on giving spikes, then it comes back down, returns to normal. And my friend said, honestly, this isn't about one-off giving. It's not about one-off generosity, right? This should really be a very deliberate commitment on our part, right? Because we're not trying to slap Band-Aids on problems. We're not trying to address specific one-off needs. Giving, true generosity should be permeating all of our life, right? And again, whether it's financial, whether it's time, whatever it is, this is really about changing and transforming all of our lives, not just what we do with the money in our bank account. And I think, as I was thinking about it, I think in that sense, generosity and love, and this is a bit of a tangent, so bear with me, but I think generosity and love kind of go hand in hand, right? And this is why, right? So they're both commitments, right? They're both habits that you build over time. So some of you know my wife, Holly. She runs her own boutique fitness studio. And she sees lots and lots of people who want to move better, get in better shape, whatever their motivation is, right? They go see her so they can be more fit, so they can move better. But one thing that she's observed over and over again is that it's not like the New Year's resolutions that get people to change their lives. It's the small habits, right? It's not going to be that big workout you do on the 2nd of January where you do 20 reps of every possible exercise that you know in your mind, and then you do it 10, do that 10 times, right? That's not what's going to change your life and make you physically more fit or move better. But it's the small habits, right? And that's why she will often coach her clients, right, to take small steps. If you're learning to run a 5K, you start by just walking, right? And then after you walk enough, then you incorporate short runs followed by more walks, right? But you kind of build up to it, right? It's these small habits that will ultimately lead you to form a big behavior change. But you can't just change it overnight. And like I said, it's a bit of a tangent, but I do think that this is true of love and it's true of giving and generosity as well, right? What you really want is consistent behavior, not big one-off grand gestures, right? I think for those of us who might still be dating or trying to find out what life holds in terms of life partner, here's a word of advice: don't go with the person who makes big grandiose gestures and then forgets to call you for the next 2 weeks. You want someone who's going to be there for you. And trust me, especially like, if you do decide to like, be with this person for the rest of your life, you want someone who's going to show you love by taking out the trash, by doing the laundry, by, taking care of the kids when you're at church. Thanks, babe, I love you. But you want someone who's going to do that, right? You don't want someone who's going to give you like, big expensive gifts like, once a month, but then otherwise not bother talking to you, listening to you, trying to be there for you in all the small moments. And the same is true of giving, right? I don't think giving should really be about the big gestures, right? The guy who, or lady who writes $1 million check and gives it to the church or the charity. I mean, yeah, sure, that's nice, and thanks for the gift, but you have to wonder, like, but is that reflective of that whole life? Is there a consistent pattern and habit of giving? And does that grow over time, right? Here's the other thing that I think is true is that if you're really getting it, if you're really walking in Christian generosity, you're constantly looking, how can I give more, right? How can I grow in my generosity and my giving? And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here when I talk about habits, right? If you want to be great at giving, if you want to be generous, if you want that heart surgery to work and like real spiritual life and freedom to flow, then I think you kind of need to kind of be in this mindset of like, I'm not trying to hit some kind of target. Because honestly, there are no targets. God owns everything, right? It's not 10%, it's not 20%, it's not 100%. God owns it all anyway. It's not about a target. It's really about a spirit, right? About a desire. How do I give more? How do I bless people around me more, right? That's what we should be aiming for, not targets. Okay. Now I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about where I think maybe your mind's already going. I know certainly my mind has been dwelling on it a lot, in part because the church finance meeting is this afternoon. But I think in large part because I think for me, generosity and giving, I struggle with it the most when it comes to money, when it comes to material wealth and things, right? And I've kind of wondered why that is, right? Like, why is this, as opposed to like giving of my time, volunteering, or anything else, why is this harder? I don't really have a good answer for it. I mean, it should kind of all be the same, but for whatever reason, I think many of us are just, call it the nature of the fall, whatever else. It's just different when it comes to money. We seem to hold on to it a bit tighter. We seem to care about it a little bit more. Maybe it's society around us because, people out there seem to care about money a lot, and so maybe like we just kind of imbibe that, right? Maybe we grew up, and I think it's not all for bad reasons, right? I think some people grow up in really, really challenging life circumstances. They grow up poor or they grow up not having enough, and so it becomes something they care about a lot, right? For whatever reason, I just think that as a whole, we all seem to be a bit more sensitive or a bit more trouble or whatever words you want to use when we talk about giving in the context of money and material wealth. And I just want to make it clear again, the Bible has nothing against money, just the medium of exchange. It's like you can carry $50 around in your wallet, or you can haul around the dead carcass of a sheep, your choice. The Bible has nothing against money, right? But it's the love of money, it's greed, it's pursuit of money. It's maybe one way to think about it is like trying to make money your God, right? Rather than God himself. That's what the Bible warns against. And I think part of that then is insecurity, right? And maybe I think for me that's part of it too. It's insecurity, right? That I won't have enough, that I won't be able to provide for my family, that in retirement I won't be able to, have 3 meals a day or a roof over our heads or whatever it is, right? But I think for me, maybe that's part of it, right? The sense of insecurity. And so I need to make sure that there's enough so that I don't need to worry about the future. There's this movement, I'm sure some of you have heard of it, called FIRE, Financial Independence. Raise hands. Have you ever heard of the FIRE movement? Financial independence, retire early, yeah. So, okay, fewer hands than I thought. Clearly you all are don't spend as much time on the internet as I do. Uh, so there's this movement that called the FIRE movement. I think really popular. Okay, either that or you all are like older than I thought you were, but it's really popular among millennials, right? And the basic gist of it is you work really hard when you're young, you live really simply, you save up as much money as you can, and you retire early, right? Financial independence, retire early, FIRE. And I think it's great, right? I think it's great that people are conscious of money and how to spend it. I think it's great that people are committed to living frugally and saving up. I'm not really sure what people mean by retire early, and then what do you do after that, right? Like when you're 45 or 40 and you don't need to work anymore, then what do you do? I don't really know. I guess that's an individual choice. But this concept of financial independence, I was like, yeah, that'd be nice. It'd be nice if I didn't have to worry about work, if I didn't have to worry about earning money anymore, if I was financially independent, right? Or financially free, right? But then it kind of got me thinking as well, but what exactly does that mean, right? Like, when do you know that you're financially free? And are you ever truly financially free, right? I don't know. I honestly don't know, right? If that's actually something that's actually possible, if you can actually be financially free by gaining enough money. And I say that for several reasons, one of which is it seems that lots and lots of rich people who have more money than they could ever spend still seem to want more money, right? And you have to wonder, like, okay, so are they free? I mean, by the time you hit, okay, let's call it arbitrarily, let's say $10 million, you would think someone with $10 million would be pretty financially independent, right? But some people have $10 billion and they still don't feel like they have enough, right? Or 100 million and still don't feel they have enough. I remember listening to this podcast where this guy who was getting interviewed was a pretty successful businessman. He had a whole bunch of companies, in his holdings, and he kind of said, "Yeah, I think my net worth is probably in the hundreds of millions. I don't really care about how much I have. I'm just excited by doing the work." But he was actually recounting a story where he met someone who was a billionaire, who was upset that there was another billionaire out there with a bigger and nicer super yacht than he had, right? And so the guy on this podcast told this other guy, he didn't mention any names, so I have no idea who it is, but he said, like, but you've got your own super yacht and you've got billions of dollars to spend. Like, why does it matter that you don't have more? And the answer was like, well, because the other guy has more, right? So clearly you can be a billionaire and not be financially free. At the same time, I think there are also stories of people who have very, very little, yet they feel very, very free, right? Or amongst different faiths, not just the Christian faith, but there are people who take vows of poverty, right? Who choose to live lives in an extremely simple way because they feel that that's what their faith requires of them or calls them to do. And I've seen some interviews with people like Mother Teresa, for example, and she seems pretty financially free to me, right? Doesn't really seem like she worries about it, which kind of makes me think maybe financial freedom isn't about how much money you have, but rather the spirit with which you approach money, right? Maybe you find freedom not in having enough, not in holding and accumulating enough, not like being the guy who has, my barn is too small, I must tear it down and build a bigger barn. Maybe the financial freedom is found in the generosity and the giving. And maybe that's what God has been trying to tell us, right? Through millennia, right? Just saying, don't worry about having enough. I am the provider, right? Look at the birds of the air, right? They don't have, I was about to say 401ks, and I just realized only the Americans will understand what those are. They don't have CPF accounts. They don't have retirement savings, right? So maybe that's it. Maybe the financial freedom that we all crave isn't really found in money. And not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't save for retirement. But I think the question for us is, but where do we put our faith, our confidence, our trust? Is it in the bank account or is it in God? And I think this is, again, where it gets kind of personal for me. So I left my job in March of this year. right? So I enjoy my job, don't get me wrong, right? Like I like the work that I did, love the team, love the company, you know, made good money. But I decided that it was probably time to move on. And then we were having a kid in May. We had the kid in May, and I thought, look, this is a good time for me to take a break. We looked at the numbers. And it's like, okay, like yeah, this could work. This could work. We have enough saved up. You know, like the company gave me a nice exit package, and everything was they took care of the insurance. I didn't need to worry about anything. So I was like, Hakuna Matata. Does anyone get that? Okay, like yeah, the 40-year-olds are nodding their heads. No one else is. Um, oh, sorry, 30 years, 30 and 40-year-olds are nodding their heads. Life is good, no worries, right? Like we have enough saved up. I cannot work till the end of the year. I can spend time with the family, you know, like just be there for the family, just take it easy, do things that other than work for a while. I'll get a job, you know, like in 2023. Everything is good. And everything is good until you check your bank statement like every month, and you just notice that instead of ticking up, which is normally what happens when you're working and earning a steady income and like you know your budget's in order and you can save some, rather than ticking up, the numbers were ticking down, right? And the numbers for me in my bank account have not ticked down. Okay, I mean they took a hit when we bought our house, our place in Singapore, but generally speaking, through my entire working life, the numbers have been ticking up, right? I've been able to save for various things. And there was, I mean, I will say it quite honestly, like I took comfort in that, right? Knowing that, yeah, there's money in the bank account, we're good. And then for the first time in a very, very long time, probably not since I started working, the numbers started ticking down, right? Month on month on month. And for me, it was a bit of a, oh, okay, this is a bit worrying. Maybe I should, you know, accelerate the plan, get a job sooner, right? And again, right, there was no change in the circumstances. When we sat down and did the budgets and the numbers, objectively, rationally, I know like we have enough. The plan will work. I don't need to panic. I don't need to freak out. But yet, I found part of me freaking out. And it's like, oh, like we're gonna run out of money, right? Like the numbers are getting smaller and smaller, right? You know, like we're trying to teach our 3-year-old to count, right? And it's kind of almost like you know the numbers are going backwards, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is scary, right? But then I kind of found myself just kind of pausing, saying, wait a minute, am I trusting in my bank account, right? Or am I trusting in God to provide for me and my family? Right, and it was really kind of sobering for me because I know this stuff, right? Like I mean I'm talking about it, I'm sharing it with the church. I know that the bank account should not be the source of the security, but yet I think I speak for many of us when I say that yeah, actually I do still take some security in how much money I have in my wallet, right? How much we have saved and set aside. And to see that number go down from, even though I know it's temporary, even though I know there's enough, even though I know we're not in trouble, still caused me to kind of like have this moment of doubt, right? Until I kind of just stopped and said like, okay, hang on, like who am I trusting? Where is my security coming from? Where do I put my faith? So this, coming back again, right, to generosity, I think one of the things that generosity does, as I said before, is that it helps set us free, right? I really do believe generosity is true financial freedom in that sense. And again, not the absolute amount of generosity or giving, but rather the spirit, right? That we are liberated from our fears of having enough so that we can be set free to give and to experience the giving of God in a more life-giving way, honestly. Okay, so you know, when I prepare the sermon and I think about the message, I do kind of anticipate questions that people may have, right? And one question I know came to my mind was, but how much is enough, right? How do I know when I have enough? Like, you know, is there a certain number to hit? And maybe it's because, like, you know, I work in tech and we're very data-driven. We like our numbers. We like, you know, like hard objective things that we can hold on to, KPIs. Um, but how much is enough? Um, and I don't really have an answer for everyone because I don't think there is a universal answer for everyone. But I'll share about two stories that I've read in the relatively recent past. One is by Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian writer. He wrote an essay called "How Much Land Does a Man Need?" And if you're interested, go Google it. Um, there are several English translations out there that I think you'll find. But it's a story about basically a man who is, he's just greedy. Look, that's the bluntest way to put it. He always wants more, right? He has something, it's enough for objective purposes. He's not hungry or in want, but he wants more. And he goes to greater and greater lengths to get more land, really, right? This is an agrarian fable. And ultimately, this ends up killing him. The story is way more dramatic than that, and obviously Tolstoy tells it a lot better than that, so go read it if you want to. But I think from that, I kind of gathered, look, there's got to be a limit. There's got to be a point at which you say, enough is enough. I don't need to work any harder. I don't need to pursue anymore. There's another great story. I'm completely going to butcher this guy's name. I believe he's German, Heinrich Boll. And yeah, and I can't. By the way, Jörg, I can't read the German title of this essay, so I'm just going to read it in English. It's called "An Anecdote Concerning the Lowering of Productivity," and this one is great. Like it's just as good as the one from Tolstoy, and I'll summarize it real quick. Right. So there's a tourist and there's a fisherman. This is set somewhere in the west of Europe, so Portugal, Spain, somewhere where the sun's always shining and life is always good. And there's a tourist who's out walking by the water. He sees a fisherman who is just chilling by his boat. Right? He's not out fishing at sea. He's just kind of sitting there, like sipping his. I assume it's a red wine if it's the west of Europe, and he's just like enjoying the day, right? Enjoying the beautiful ocean view. And the tourist is kind of perplexed by this and asks him like, well, why aren't you fishing, right? There's still plenty of daylight left. You could be, pulling in a lot more fish. And the fisherman kind of looks at him and says like, well, why would I want more fish? I already caught enough for today. And the tourist says, basically says, well, if you fish more, then you earn more. You earn more, you can expand your business. You expand your business, you make more money, and you're more successful. And then eventually, you can just like kick back and relax, enjoy life. Kind of like the rich dude in Jesus' story, right? I'll build the bigger barn, and I'll kick back and relax, and life will be good. And then the fisherman kind of looks at him and says like, so what do you think I'm doing now? Right? So, I don't know what your number is. How much is enough? I think that's a personal question. You've got to answer it for yourself. But clearly, there has got to be a point at which we can objectively say, I have enough. I don't need to work any harder, right? I don't want to travel as much. I want to spend more time with my kids, right? I know this is true for many of us who struggled through the pandemic, being away from home, where you say, look, I've got a great job here, but my parents are getting older. I want to go be with them, right, in this last 10, 20 years that they have. Or my kids are getting older, and I'm always, now that the pandemic's over, everyone's open up, I'm on the road again all the time. I want to take a step back, right? How much is enough? Can we throw up 1 Timothy 6? No, 1 Timothy. Yeah, thank you. So this is what, by the way, this how much is enough question has been around forever, right? We're not the first ones to confront it in the 21st century. But this is what the Bible says, right? Godliness or contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing in the world, and we can take nothing out of it. If we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, to many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. And then, again, 1 Timothy 6:10, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So I don't know how much is enough for you. I think you have to answer that question for yourself. I think, though, if you want to be serious about generosity, if you believe and you say, like, yeah, I believe that what the Bible says is true, right? That this is part of this following Jesus, this part of the fuller spiritual life that I'm called into, that I want to be in, then I encourage you to think about a few things, right? Think about joy, right? Is your joy growing as your giving grows? Enough, right? Nothing wrong with wanting to provide for your families. In fact, the Bible, Paul, in one of his letters, also says, like, make sure the elders in the church are providing for themselves and their families. He says, otherwise they are strayed from the faith, right, or something to that effect. So it's important to provide for your family, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But if you have enough, then what are you doing with the rest of that, right? If you have enough time for your family and the things that should be priorities and commitments, where is the rest of your time going, right? Or your money going? And who do you trust? Again, you got to answer this question. And look, it's not a once and done thing, right? Like, I overcame that existential moment of, I need to go out and get the first job I can, right? The bank account must grow again. But I know I'm not over it. I know it's going to come back to me, right? It's much like many, many challenges and trials in our life, right? Like, we don't always just leave it all behind us, right? One of my old pastors once said, like, life is like a circle, right? And you just hope that each round that you go, the challenge and the trial, you get to the answer a little bit faster, right? You make that circle. You always keep making that circle, but you hope each time you get to the lesson a little bit faster, you know it, and you get there faster. So who do you trust? So I'll say this as well. Is the church finance meeting after this? We're going to talk about the church finances, the good news that our vision is bigger than our current tithing. But this is not a message about church. Church is involved in it, part of it, right? But it's not just about church, right? Because look, here at Inspire, I think we're doing something amazing and awesome for our community and the community that we are in. But God isn't confined to working only through Inspire, right? The redemption of the world is not only happening here, it's happening everywhere that God is, and God is everywhere. So don't think that this is a message only about giving to church, giving more time in ministry, giving more to your tithe. If that's what you feel led to do, if that's what you feel you want to do, that's great. Love it when the family comes together. Again, God will provide. But it's bigger than that, right? There could be ways that you could serve, that you could bring your gifts, what God has entrusted to you, to bless the world beyond this church, right? So think about that as well. So we started the message with Matthew 6:19 to 24. It actually goes on, so let's pull up Matthew 6:25. And let's just end with this, right? Because I do believe that generosity is the key to financial freedom. And I thought that what Jesus said here kind of really resonated with me. Therefore I tell you, right? By the way, so 6:24 was, you can't serve two masters, right? You can't serve both God and money. And then he goes on to say, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They don't sow, they don't reap, they don't store away in barns or try and break them down and build bigger ones. Yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? Why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. So if that's how God clothes the grass of the field, it's here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? Keeman? So don't worry, saying, what should we eat? What should we drink? What should we wear? How much money is in my bank account? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them, and he will provide. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. All these things will be given to you as well. So therefore, do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So in closing, I just encourage you, don't worry. God will provide, right? If you believe that, if you want to believe that, just follow Jesus. Try and be generous. Start small. Grow the habit, right? But give. you'll find that God gives too. All right. So apparently service ends at 12 o'clock, which is something that I actually never realized. But we'll start the church finance meeting at 12:30. So 30 minutes for people to go out, get a bite, use the bathroom, get your kids, whatever you need to do. But if Heath and Amy, you wouldn't mind, can you close us in Freedom is Coming? Let's sing it. Yeah. All right. We'll close with a song. Let this song be a prayer. And yeah, I'll see you all after.
All right, let's sing. There is a promised land waiting for me. Sometimes there's an ocean that lies in between. I'll keep on traveling the path where you've been till I'm right where you want me. That's where I will be. Freedom's coming and it has a name. Oh, no room for my chains. Oh, you take them away. Freedom's coming and it has a name. And it is Jesus, how sweet is the name. He said it's for freedom that I was set free. Now I walk in the victory that you won for me. And if on the journey there are walls that remain, I'll sing in the promise you're making a way. Freedom's coming and it has a name. Oh, no room for my chains. Oh, you take them away. Freedom's coming and it has a name. And it is Jesus. How sweet is the name. Freedom's coming and it has a name. Oh, no room for my chains. Oh, you take them away. Freedom's coming and it has a name. And it is Jesus. How sweet is the name. Let's sing one by one. One by one, chain by chain, watch them fall as we lift your name. Strongholds break, sin erased, washed by grace in the power of your name. One by one, chain by chain, watch them fall as we lift your name. Strongholds break, sin erased, washed by grace in the power of your name. One more time. One by one, chain by chain, watch them fall as we lift your name. Strongholds break, sin erased, washed by grace in the power of your name. Have an amazing week. We'll see you in the meeting at 12:30 if you're sticking around for it. Otherwise, have a blessed week. Go out and be encouraged. See you guys.